So today we're talking about tutoring as a safe space and the idea of psychological safety for your student. Basically, we're going to go over our brains and stress, the impacts of your tutoring relationships, what you can do to promote safety during tutoring, and then strategies and ideas that are going to be a little bit sprinkled all throughout. And I'm going to start out with one of those. So this is a common social, emotional, or mindfulness check-in. You might have tried it out before, or you might not have. I am asking, even though I unfortunately can't see all of your faces, please participate in these. A big idea throughout this presentation is try it out. There's a lot of options that work really well, and it's really about finding what works well for you and what works well for your student. They don't have to be the same thing, but try it out and see how it feels. If you have done this before, or any of these strategies and activities, I might go a little faster than you're used to because if you're doing this with a student, you need to adjust to their developmental level. So for a very young student, you might want to go really fast. For an older student, you could slow it down a little, and you could have more discussion about it or less, again, depending on the age and kind of personality of your student. So feel free to close your eyes or keep them open. Please start out thinking of a calm and peaceful place. And this is wide open. It can be a place that you know really well, or it can be a place that you've never been, but you would like to imagine. This is the part that it can help to close your eyes. Picture, how does it look? What do you see? What sounds do you hear in this place? Are there any smells in this place? Is there anything you can feel, like under your feet, in your hands? Are you sitting somewhere? And is there any taste for you in this place? It could be a taste in the air, or maybe your calm and peaceful place has snacks. So take a moment, really picture that. And now I would like everyone to please find the chat. So that is going to be one speech bubble, not two. If you put in two speech bubbles, it's harder for, well, actually everyone can't see it and it's harder for us to see. So find your single speech bubble where it says chat and type in just one word for a feeling you get in this place. Peaceful, excitement, joy, calm, peaceful, light, peace, cool, relaxed. I love it. Thank you, everybody. Serene, content, serenity, quiet, calm. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everybody. And the bonus here for me as the presenter is that having imagined this place, your brains are now a little more ready to learn. So from here, let's look for a second at, sneak. Yeah, I planned that. And I have ways that I can be sneaky with you guys, and you can be sneaky with your students too, but for their benefit. So this is actually just a piece of the Skull and Wheels mission, but I wanted to highlight it for today: to enhance educational opportunities for children who are experiencing homelessness from kindergarten through 12th grade. So this is very central for all of us. This is absolutely important. And we have tutors who are tutoring 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So we're tutoring all different topics, subjects, levels of complexity. And today we are going to focus on strategies that can work for all of them. But I would still like to know, if you don't mind, What grade is your student in that you tutor? I'd like to get a feel for what age groups we're talking about today. So again, in the chat box, can you please write for me what grade is your student in right now? So I'm seeing elementary school, high school, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 11th, 9th, and 7th. Wow. 6th, 4th. It's really balanced today. 1st. This is great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited that we have representation from all of these years. And in thinking about enhancing educational opportunities, we want basically our students to be ready to learn what they want to learn and what they're like facing the challenges to learn, what they're struggling to learn. So the first big point of today, this is a theme throughout everything. When our brains feel safe, we are ready to learn. So your student can be in any grade. Actually, this could be a baby to a person who's 100 years old. When our brains feel safe, we are ready to learn. So the way that our brain interprets our environment, as well as the actual environment, is very, very essential. And a second theme for today that I want to introduce right away is that practice strengthens our neural pathways. So we're going to get straight into some talk about the brain to start out. And neural pathways are how we learn. So what we see here is a very strong established neural pathway in the center. That's that big, thick line. That means that this brain has practiced traveling that line, whatever it might be, many, many times. And once you have that line very well established, you can build more complex, different later pathways out on that. It's like a foundation. And this could be anything, again, anything we want to learn. We can be talking about academics. We can be talking about learning to learn, learning to socialize, learning to process emotions. So going back for a second to our mission, if we want to enhance those educational opportunities, this is a big part of what we're trying to do. Practice the parts that make it possible for our students to learn. So our first topic from our little outline is the stress systems in their brain, our brains and stress. And there's basically just two parts of the brain that I want to introduce today. And the terminology doesn't really matter. What really matters is how these two parts of the brain work and interact. So if it's easy for you to pick up the terms, or if you already know them, great. If not, that's great too. We're basically going to talk about the reptile brain and the logical brain. So the amygdala is the reptile brain. It's here towards the back of your head. And this is a part that's essential for survival, and it's relatively very simple. So it actually even exists in the brains of reptiles. It produces strong feelings and it keeps us alive. So fear, anger, anxiety, intense joy, any feeling that you think about that you can feel in your body, that's coming from the amygdala. So those feelings you feel in your stomach, in your chest, maybe in your shoulder muscles and your head, those are coming from your amygdala, and it develops pretty quickly. So our students, from the ones in kindergarten, their brains can produce feelings that are the same size as adult feelings. They're if you can picture like the size of a feeling, their feelings are the same as ours in size. The prefrontal cortex is the logical brain. It's up in front here. And this is the part that basically does what we want a student to be able to do in school. So controlling and processing our emotions, thinking logically, learning, socializing, predicting, planning, that learning to learn piece I mentioned a moment ago. We can practice every day to strengthen these abilities, just the same as any other skill. If we practice to do those things, they will get stronger. However, the prefrontal cortex takes 25 to 30 years to develop. And that is because it's incredibly complex. This is the folds of the brain that you picture when you picture like a physical brain. It's just not ready for any of our students. So whether you have a kindergartner, first grader, or you're working with a teenager in high school, their prefrontal cortex isn't entirely ready to process the strength and size of the emotions that might come up for them. So this is where we can have a real opportunity to support them, is to practice strategies that help, the strategies help us and them, but they might need to rely on those strategies more than we do. A second way to look at this same interaction is that a brain that's unstressed, so that's a brain that feels psychological safety, that perceives the environment as being a safe place. An unstressed brain really allows the prefrontal cortex, the logical brain, to do its best work. So you feel really in control. And this is when learning happens. The stressed brain, which, because the prefrontal cortex is not quite as well developed and strong for students, well, for younger students, for children, the stress system might happen more easily even than it does with us, and it does happen with adults. So the prefrontal cortex can actually be dimmed or turned off by the amygdala. If the amygdala thinks that there's danger in the environment of any type, it has that power. That means that under stress and strong emotions, our brain cannot learn physically. That the part of the brain that learns isn't working. So in order to get back to enhancing educational opportunities, we have to do our best to move our students' brains towards this unstressed state, and also give them strategies for how they can do that on their own. Now, to talk a little more about that, I have a clip from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is the first Surgeon General of California. Her work is amazing. She's one of my heroes. If you're not familiar with her, I very highly suggest watching a presentation of hers. She's done TED Talks. She's doing really incredible work. But this is focused on toxic stress.
It works a little something like this.
Quick check. Can everybody hear this clearly? Yes? Wonderful. Thank you.
So imagine you're walking in a forest and you see this guy, right? What happens in our brains and bodies? Well, immediately our amygdala, right, the brain's fear response, sounds the alarm, right, and activates our fight or flight response. So we release a ton of stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. You know, we have a corticotropic releasing hormone, CRH, kicks off the party, and we have all these activation of these stress hormones. And so our hearts start to pound, our pupils dilate, our airways open up. And we shunt blood, right, to our large muscles for running and jumping so that we can either fight despair or run from fear, right? That's the activation of our fight or flight response. Now, the problem is, if you were to think about it, fighting a bear wouldn't seem like a good idea, would it? No, he's big, he's got teeth, look at him, he's got claws. And that's why the amygdala actually sends projections to the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain that's responsible for judgment and impulse.
I am so sorry. I didn't know that would mute the video. I'll go back a few seconds.
Our fight or flight response. So we release a ton of stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol, you know, we have a corticotropic releasing hormone, CRH kicks off the party, and we have all these activation of these stress hormones. And so our hearts start to pound, our pupils dilate, our airways open up. And we shunt blood, right, to our large muscles for running and jumping so that we can either fight this bear or run from the bear, right? That's the activation of our fight or flight response. Now, the problem is, if you were to think about it, fighting a bear wouldn't seem like a good idea, would it? No, he's big, he's got teeth, look at him, he's got claws. And that's why the amygdala actually sends projections to the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain that's responsible for judgment and impulse control and executive function. And it turns it way, way down, right? We see this dramatic downregulation of prefrontal cortical functioning, right? Because if you're in a forest and there's a bear, the last thing that you want is impulse control getting in the way of survival, right? And instead what it does is it turns up the noradrenergic nucleus of the locus ceruleus, or as I like to call it, the part of the brain responsible for, I don't know karate, but I do know crazy, right? This is the within the brain stress response center, and it gets us amped up. Now, the less commonly known thing when we activate our stress response is that it also activates our immune response. Because if you're getting in a fight with this guy, you want your immune system to be primed to bring inflammation to stabilize whatever wounds so that you can live long enough to either beat the bear or get away. It's brilliant. It was evolved over millennia to save our lives from a mortal threat. But the problem is what happens when this bear comes home every night.
Okay. So what she's about to get into in this clip is the difference between stress that helps you survive and toxic stress. I'm sorry that the audio went out for a moment. I couldn't make the video better, but I hope everybody was able to at least hear her and get the gist. I love her explanations. And what she is talking about here is a little bit different from what our students are facing. She's talking about something called adverse childhood experiences, but the manner of toxic stress affecting our students and their brains is exactly the same.
It works a little something.
The bears that our students face are poverty, homelessness, and that's been always true. And now this year, COVID-19. So the reason that these are the bears and not other stressful events that a child might face is that they're consistent long-term stressors. So when that happens, as Dr. Burke-Harris was just explaining, the body and the brain react each time. And if they're reacting too constantly for too long, it eventually wears down organs in our body, it wears down the immune system, and it can even affect brain development. These are called social determinants of health. For that reason, it can affect long-term health throughout somebody's life. Now, it's also really important to keep in mind that going through these doesn't affect everybody the same. So it might be a really huge challenge for certain people to go through, something that really affects them very strongly. And another student or another child might have enough supports around them that it doesn't affect them so strongly. And that's where there is a hopeful note to this. So given all of this adversity and no support, it's likely that we'll end up with really severe health, physically in the body and in the brain, health impacts. But with the right kinds of support, we see really great results. And when I say results, I mean life outcomes for children. So on top of these bears that our students are facing, We're also asking them to take the intellectual risks that you need to take to open up and be vulnerable to learn things you don't know. We're asking them to focus. We're asking them to absorb information. And that's where we can get into the power of tutoring. So your tutoring sessions can function as a safe space for the students. They are going through upheaval, transition, fear, and possibly grief, maybe a lot of other emotions too. And one of the reasons that this is so impactful is that the virus took away a lot of those supports that help. Here, this quote is from a research study focusing on staying in school, but it can help them with their lifelong health, with their big long-term goals. And one of those major key supports is strong relationships with caring adults. So a second way, and now we're going to dive into our tutoring sessions a little bit, a way to look for clues about where your student is psychologically, because again, it could be different for every student from day to day. You're looking for that just right, where their eyes are alert, you can see physically they're ready to learn, and that shows that they're feeling psychological safety at that moment. If you start to see these other cues, which here it's split up into a time when their brain is over aroused and a time when their brain is under aroused, and then a combination. So if they start to seem a little aggressive, to flit, so their attention's like bouncing around too much, or on the other side, if they seem to space out, their eyes are glazed over, they look sad, or if you see that they're actually afraid or anxious, those are cues that tell you their brain's not feeling safe. It's time to take a break. And another wonderful way to know is just to ask them. You don't have to use a picture to ask them. You can just ask them straight away, or you can go through an image like this. But first of all, asking them how are they feeling, they get to tell you very directly. And sometimes having a chart can help with either introducing new vocabulary for a student who maybe doesn't know all these words yet, or if you have a student who's in that phase where you ask, oh, how are you doing? And the answer is always fine. A chart like this can help. Or any that you find. There's a lot of different options. You can have fun with them. You can make one with your student. The other really amazing thing that happens when you ask a student how they're feeling, especially if you notice some cues that maybe they're not feeling safe, their brains aren't feeling safe, is that if they say how they're feeling, it forces their prefrontal cortex, so that front logical part of the brain, to start processing it. So it might be that they're having really strong feelings coming from back here. They're feeling it in their body. And they haven't even realized. But by speaking, because the prefrontal cortex also controls our language, that's one of those supports we can give them. Say you're feeling out loud and you start to feel more control over it. Another point that I really want to draw out from what Dr. Burke-Harris was talking about is that stress isn't bad. Stress on its own isn't bad. It's there. All of these systems in our brain, our whole body reaction, it's there to help us survive. And what we see with children is that not only does it help us survive, but children who experience stress and also the supports that help them manage stress end up doing a lot better than another child who doesn't have any of those stressful events, doesn't face adversity, but also doesn't have those supports. So stress helps us. We're supposed to feel it. It helps stretch out our body's systems and our brain's systems like a rubber band, and then we relax again. That process is what gives us resilience. So we're supposed to feel all these feelings. Your students should be getting angry sometimes. They are going to feel lonely sometimes. There's nothing wrong with these feelings we think of as negative feelings. The trick is to work with them on how do you relax again? That's the part that makes us resilient. So resilience is the ability to get back up again. That's why I love this picture of this little boy having his fall from his bicycle. This is a great example of positive stress. It's going to hurt, then he's going to learn to get back up again and get back on that bicycle. Resilience is not having this storm or these fires outside of you or inside of you and just saying, this is fine. So if your student isn't ready to learn every session, that's okay. That's part of the process of what they have to learn. And students who have good resilience, it leads to better learning for that reason, better health, and more positive relationships in their life. Now, resilience is something that we want for everyone on this earth. And the most common factor, there's been a lot of studies on why do some people who experience adversity come out doing really well and some come out doing really poorly. The most common factor is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. So I want to stop for a second here and ask everybody to go to the chat box again. Think of, did you have a supportive adult like that in your childhood? Think of who they are and type one word or a few words to describe them in the chat. How would you just, excuse me, how would you describe that person? Positive, thank you. Inconsistent, patient. Consistent. Motivating. Inclusive, wonderful. Motivated. Yeah, this person can be like a role model, or it can be just someone who's really caring. They take all sorts of forms in all of our lives. Let me just plug in my computer really quickly. Determined, invested in your growth. Thank you so much. So I want to take a moment for another interactive social emotional check-in. Again, this is one you could do with your students if it works well with them, if it's something that they like. And after hearing all of that about all of the stress in our brains, sometimes it can cause us to tense up too. So again, this is one that you may have tried, or it might be new to you, but there's a couple different ways to do it. It's called a body scan. With adults, oftentimes you're asked to just focus your attention on each part of your body one at a time. And this can work really well for older children too, teenagers. Or if you have a younger student or a more wiggly student, you can do this by physically tensing and then relaxing. So I'll start with that one because that's the only one you'll be able to see. The other one is just using your mind. So starting at your face, and I'll ask you to try it out with me, see if you like it. And again, I'll go a little bit faster than you would usually go with an adult or with an older student. So please tighten your face, like really tighten all the muscles, and in your head if you can, and then let it really relax. And then your neck and your shoulders, tighten them up. Make them really tense, and then let all that tension drain out. Now your arms and your hands, tighten them, make your muscles, and then let all the stress and tension drain out. Now move on to your stomach and your back. tense and then relax. To your legs, tense them up and then let them totally relax. And finally, your ankles and your feet. So tense them up and then let them relax. This is another great way, either on starting your session, or if you notice that your student starts to feel stressed out or their attention starts to wander, this is a good break to take. So now I want to move into the impacts of tutoring relationships. This, I think, is very important to bring up. There are specific experiences that, similar to the specific adverse childhood experiences that can affect a person when they grow up, and they say childhood, but they do mean from 0 to 18. There are oftentimes, if you've heard people talk about that before, or if they talk about it in the future, it can feel a little bit dark because you learn, oh, all of these things can affect the long-term well-being of each of us. However, there are also positive childhood experiences that are just as specific. And they have different names: positive childhood experiences, benevolent childhood experiences. But there is always included in that list adults who are not parents or caregivers who are there for you, took genuine interest, can provide you with support or advice. And these specific experiences help children build up that resilience. So for me, it's very exciting to be working with an organization that's a big part of what we're all doing, is taking genuine interest in a student. Now, I want us to think about, before we thought about an adult that was there for us, now I want you to think about yourselves. There has also been some good research on why does mentoring work? Sometimes it works really well. Other places, other types of models, it doesn't work as well. So when they look into mentoring that is very effective in helping children or young people reach their goals, they find these 5 main categories, these 5 main components that make mentoring effective. So I have a poll. Well, Katie has a poll for me to pop up. The categories are role modeling, advocacy, relationship and emotional support, teaching and providing information, and shared activity. And I'd just like you to tell us which of the mentoring processes are part of your tutoring sessions or relationship with your student. And be generous to yourselves. There's the poll. Katie, can they pick more than one of these? If you can pick more than one, please pick all of them that apply. If you can only pick one, please pick the one that you think is most part. Can only pick one. Sorry about that. I would imagine that most of you have many of these as part of your tutoring sessions, but please pick the one that you feel is the biggest piece for you. Uh-oh. So just let me know when those answers come in. And to be honest, I really wish that I could ask your students about what they view as being part of your sessions with them, because I bet it would be a very beautiful picture. Yeah, my cat wanted to say hi to all of you with her tail. Fantastic. So I'm seeing in the poll results that the top answer, 45%, chose relationship and emotional support, which is and should be a massive part of the tutoring relationship. Second, at 30%, teaching and providing information. And then we have role modeling, shared activity, and advocacy. Thank you so much. So it seems like for a lot of us, that relationship, that emotional piece already is top of our minds. So going on to the tutoring process, what promotes safety? What promotes that feeling of safety during tutoring specifically? Number one, very crucial and important, and this is during tutoring, this is for teachers in their classrooms, really wide ranging, routine and consistency. First of all, just keep showing up. You showing up to every session is already giving a major message to your students and is building that relationship and emotional support. Secondly, thinking about the learning and the educational piece, that consistency helps students use their brain power for learning because it helps them feel more control, helps them feel less stressed out. That predictability lowers stress levels, and practice creates automatic habits. So again, going back to our neural pathways, that practice piece makes learning easier because they don't have to put as much attention to learning. It becomes automatic. They know what's going to happen when they show up. There's no brain power being distracted for wondering about that. So sometimes when we hear routine and consistency, it can sound like it's going to be a boring session. It does not have to be. I would argue that routine should always include a chance to connect with you for that relationship piece and time for learning that includes homework as needed. So by knowing that there's going to be a time for each piece of this, that gives the routine to your students. So during the time for learning, that's the time to introduce new ideas, to challenge your student, to try new activities. And that can come within a routine. It's just about making it a little more predictable. Another great way to help them feel more in control is to offer 2 to 5 options. Definitely not more than that, fewer for younger students. So those options could be like, do you want to start the session with relaxing our bodies with a body scan, or with some deep breathing, or with some coloring for 2 or 5 minutes? Or it could be, do you want to start with a worksheet or with reading out loud? Just little options can help them feel like, okay, I'm in the driver's seat here, and then have fun with it. So another wonderful way to help your tutoring become a safe space is to support your student to fill up their coping toolbox. The idea here is to help students develop independent strategies. So not only to offer them psychological safety within your tutoring sessions, but also help them know how to do that for themselves independently. In education, we talk a lot about scaffolding. It just means helping support your student, give them more structure up until they learn to do something on their own. And then you can take away the scaffolding, like a building under construction. Sorry about this. So you can, again, make it part of your tutoring routine to try a strategy together each session. It could always be different, or if you find one right away that you both love, it could be repeating the same strategy. Model for them in age-appropriate ways. So that is to say, if A strategy for you to unwind and relax is to have a glass of wine every evening. Maybe don't share that with your student, but pick out those strategies for you that are appropriate for them, like listening to music, maybe taking care of a plant, petting your cat, things like that. Finally, talk with them directly. So tell them explicitly about what you're trying to do. They will learn that it's important and why it's important, and then they can go on to look for their own strategies if you don't find ones that work at that time for them together, or if it changes for them as they get older. So I would like to ask you what, and this is again for the chat, what works for you that you think might be a good strategy to share with your students? What works for you to manage uncomfortable emotions, big challenges, needing to learn something new that's really tough? What helps your brain get ready to learn? What helps calm it down? Reference earlier success. So think about your own past. Thank you. Humor and jokes, absolutely. Laughing together. Exercise, absolutely, that's a great one. Just like our whole body feels stress and feels those emotions, we can then use our whole body to help release stress. Listening to music, looking at pictures of cats. Yep, we all love that. The internet is like a testament to that. Petting your dog. Animals are great. And so many kids love animals too. So that's probably a good topic to go on. Music. Yes, thank you. Drawing. That's another great one to practice with your student if you both like it. Maybe one or two more before we move on. Okay. I have a lot. Affirmations. Yeah, absolutely. And that might be something that a younger student has never run into in their lives yet. Talking about superheroes. Superheroes are there to help us feel strong, right? And in control. Great. These are wonderful examples. Thank you. So this is one more piece from Dr. Burke Harris. As Surgeon General, one of the first things that she put together was a stress busting playbook. And there's lots of examples and ideas here. If you do take a look at these slides later, I have a link for it. But these are all different ways that we can look into to bust our stress. So mindfulness, physical activity and exercise, sleeping well. Sometimes it's simple things we don't think about. Sleeping well, brushing our teeth, taking a shower, supportive relationships, mental health care, and balanced nutrition. And for wrapping up today, I'm going to bring a bunch of different ideas, different things we can choose. Some of them we've already talked about, some of them are new. A nice way to phrase this that is instinctive for kids and teenagers at this point is talk about it as a battery. So your self-care battery is the same idea, looking for things that recharge you, that give you energy, that let you get ready to learn, and looking for things that drain your energy and knowing, now I need to recharge. So these are some examples for both recharging and depleting. This is something you could draw out with your student. They're all really familiar with batteries with all their devices now, so you could ask them to fill this in as a writing activity or a drawing activity. And I do have here a little bit of a guide for a lesson plan that you can use with this battery idea. It's basically asking similar questions to what I just asked you a couple slides ago. What is one thing that recharges your battery? And then you and your student can compare. What's one thing that drains your battery? And you can compare. You can also check in. Instead of asking, what are you feeling? What percent is your battery at right now? Is it halfway full? Is it even lower? Is it really full and we're like ready to go? And then what's affecting it today? Now, for a bunch of more ideas, I have a clip of Dr. Raquel Martin. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, a researcher, and a professor. She's full of great ideas, and she does talk fast. So this is just 1 minute. I'll play it, and then we'll talk a tiny bit about some of the ideas she brings up.
Thank you for joining me for another Martin Minute. Today I'm talking about coping exercises. The reason why I think it's important to have so many different coping skills is because at one point in time, something may work and something may not work, especially if you're dealing with more stress. So I like to think about it, what mode you're in. M is mindfulness. That is yoga. That is meditation. That is also grounding exercises. O is opposite action. It means I want you to do the exact opposite of what you feel like during times of stress. If you're depressed and you crawl in bed, get your behind out that bed, walk out that door and move around. A is affect identification. That's talking about your feelings, taking the time to journal, possibly to write down why you're feeling this way, what contributed to it, all of that. D is distractors. That can be coloring, that can be exercise, that could be going for a walk, that could be listening to some music and like banging out and singing. That is a good one. S is support system. That could be contacting a friend, family member, colleague, anyone who you feel as though can help you and can help you cope. It's good to have a lot of exercises in your mental health toolbox, because something may not work, and that doesn't mean you're going to stop and go back into that negative mood. That means you're going to choose something else. Rotate them, rotate, and try something else.
Okay. I hope everybody could follow that. I do have the link in here too in the slides if you want to go back over it later. But a lot of what she mentioned, you had already mentioned. And I know that when I saw this a lot, there were some new ideas there for me when I saw this for the first time. What I love that she says is rotate the skills. So it's not going to be enough to just have one coping strategy, one thing that recharges your battery. It's not going to work all the time. So that's where we can really come in to help our students to build that up.
Thank you for joining me for another Martin Minute. Today I'm talking about coping exercises.
Sorry. There we go. So this, I'm pretty sure, is the last time I'm going to make you look at this same picture. But one of the first things she mentioned was meditation, mindfulness. And something that I wanted to bring up to all of you is that a lot of research treats this as one practice. And then it starts to sound like, does mindfulness and meditation really do all that? But what it does is whatever it is that you practice in your practice of meditation or mindfulness, that's what you get good at. So if you are practicing a meditation that is just about being still, being present with your breath, that's going to help you be still with yourself and calm down. It's not going to help you increase compassion and empathy for others. If you practice a type of meditation that is about like loving kindness, that connects you with other people, that's what you're thinking about, that is going to increase compassion and social skills. So, like reducing your social stress. So if you want to try some of these out with your students, whatever it is you practice with them is what they're going to get better at. So mindfulness is just a moment that's calm inside your mind, focusing on the present and not judging yourself, and it can look different for everybody. One mindfulness strategy, I see a mention of UCL Mindful in the chat. That is a great app. Thank you. One strategy that's great for kids is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And this would just be ask them, they can tell you out loud, what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can feel or touch? 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. It's very accessible for any age of child and student. She also mentioned affect identification. That is naming feelings. We already talked about that a little bit, but it is really powerful. It helps them to communicate better with their family, with their friends, their teachers, with you. It does build empathy because you're practicing recognizing emotions. So you'll recognize them better in others. And it normalizes feelings, especially if you also tell them, how are you feeling today? It doesn't have to be great every day. It can open a conversation. And the very last thing that I want to focus on, and we could try this together. She also mentioned distractors, and we talked about exercise earlier. So there are some that you can do through a video screen together. It could be all different types of exercise. There's lots of ways to move your body. They're all positive. I think that one that can be really fun is this exercises for neck and shoulder pain. I don't know if your students are having neck and shoulder pain yet, but it feels really good and it can be pretty silly and bring a little humor into that session. So the very last thing I'll ask you to do with me today is these first 3 exercises for neck and shoulder pain. I hope they're big enough to see, but I will show you. The first is the neck retraction. So you sit up or stand up straight, push your chin back, and then let it relax. Push your chin back, and then let it relax. Next is a head drop, which is just drop your head down, relax, and then drop it back. Let it relax. And then drop it down, and then drop it back. I hope you are trying these. This feels great on my shoulders, at least my shoulders. And finally, the side bend. So lean your ear to the shoulder, just let it dip, then lift it, and let it dip to the other side. So for today, my takeaways that I hope came across in all this talking today is that when our brains feel safe, we're ready to learn, that you matter to your student in the long term. Even if there are some days when it feels like you're not getting anywhere, over the long term, those days are part of the process. To be consistent, and then some of these strategies and ideas, and I hope that they encourage you both to use these, but also to look for more. There's a lot of great resources out there. And thank you so much.